In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the nature of certain kinds of justification and the difference between an internalist picture of what justification is and an externalist picture of justification. Remember what we've talked about up to this point when thinking about what it is to have a justified belief. Remember, we are interested in what the nature of knowledge is. We've come to the conclusion that knowledge requires true beliefs that are justified, that is, that you have to have a good reason for believing them. And then when we thought about what justification is, we discussed the notion of evidence and what it is to have sufficient evidence. So the evidentialist view of what justification is basically identifies being justified with having sufficient evidence for your belief. And then we can ask what exactly evidence is. And this becomes a complicated kind of problem or puzzle or difficulty for philosophers because there's different kinds of things that can seemingly count as evidence, and it's unclear. It seems like it matters how you're connected to the evidence, or what exactly counts as your evidence, to see whether or not you actually know something. So, what is evidence? Well, there's two different things that in the vicinity that you might think of count as evidence. Suppose you have some belief, like that snow is white. Well, what would be your evidence for snow is white? Well, there's a couple of different things that there could be, right? One of them could be the fact out there in the world, right, that snow is white. That fact could count as evidence, and you could have access to that evidence, and then that could support your belief that snow is white. Or there could just be a bunch of other beliefs that you have, true beliefs that you have, like, that you believe that the clouds in the sky are white, and that, or that the clouds are white, and that clouds share the same color as snow. Now, these two things, like, what exactly is going on here? Well, facts are things that are out in the world, and the question of whether or not those things count as evidence is different from the idea that of there being beliefs that you have, sort of, per se, in your head, and those things counting as evidence. So the issue here is whether or not the evidence that you have for your beliefs is internal, kind of to you, something that you believe, or external to you, something out there in the world, the facts of the matter. Here's a sort of example that maybe will make this a little bit clearer as a distinction. So imagine that you're a scientist and you're trying to prove some proposition P. You're trying to prove some statement, right? Oh, electrons are like this, or something like that, right? And you run an experiment in order to try and prove this. And when you finish the experiment, you come up with your results, right? You've done the experiment well. You've come up with all this data. You've got your results. Your results, are a set of statements or whatever that look different from P because they come from the experiment. So you have these results Q. Now, as it turns out, Q supports P, right? The statements that you've got from your results, they support P. In fact, they even prove that P is true beyond a shadow of a doubt. But you haven't really been able to do the data analysis or something like that. You have no clue that Q is relevant to P at all, right? You have no clue that Q does, shows that P is true. To you, Q is just the experimental data that you have, that you received from doing your experiment while you were trying to show that P is true. Now, question, do you have evidence for P in this situation? If you answer the question yes, then you're an externalist about evidence. That is, you think that you have the evidence, it's there for you, even though you don't recognize it as being evidence. You have the evidence for P. If you think no, then you are an internalist about evidence, where the idea here is that you have access to Q, but until you come to recognize the relationship between Q and P and sort of justify it for yourself, you don't have evidence. You don't recognize Q, Q, as evidence, and so it can't be evidence for you. On the internalist view about knowledge, you basically need to be justified in your beliefs, and you need to have a certain kind of internal access to that justification. So, when exactly do you know something? Like, what is it that you need to do or have access to in order to know something? Well, on the internalist view, there are different variations. One of them is a really strong one. On the very strong variation of internalism, in order to know some proposition P, you need to know that you know that proposition, right? And this is called the KK principle, the knowledge principle. In order to know something, you need to know that you know that thing. Now, this is a really strong requirement, and it's probably too strong because, for all the things that you know, it's hard to always know that you know them. Um, but, you probably still know a lot of things. So most internalists don't endorse the KK principle, but they endorse something close, the JK principle. The JK principle is that in order to know something, you must be justified in believing that you know that thing. So the JK principle is justification knowledge principle, and it basically just says that for any bit of information that you know, so that is, if you know it, you have a justified true belief in it. You also must have a justified belief that you know it, right? So that you have a justified true belief, right? So the idea here is that you have to, upon reflection, you think about like, okay, you know that snow is white. You think about how you know that snow is white, and you realize that you have a justified belief that you believe that you know that snow is white, right? And that's basically what's going on here. You need to be justified in believing that you know P. You need this internal access to the reasons that you have that justify you in believing the information that you know. So, kind of the idea here is internalism about justification says that you can, on reflection, determine what your reasons are for your justified beliefs. So, anytime you have a justified belief in something, you can, upon reflection, recognize your justification, come to sort of point out the reasons that you have for the belief that you have. You have a kind of access, this is often called access internalism, to the reasons that you have for believing the things that you know. And sometimes there's going to be, information that's available to you, and this I'm sure has happened to you before, but you haven't sort of put it in the right order, and so you haven't come to realize that the information that you have access to sort of supports some particular belief, right? In this case, you haven't organized your thoughts in some way and come to see that what beliefs you have, what justification you have, supports what other beliefs that you might want to have, or something like that. In this case, that would be basically akin to the scientist scenario. The scientist has access to all this information, Q, but hasn't sort of put it in the right order and come to see that this information, this data analysis or whatever that the scientist is doing, actually supports the proposition P that they're trying to prove. Now, a classic problem for internalism is skepticism. Now, of course, when you have justification for your belief P, so, look at your hand. This is a hand. Your belief that P, what is it that justifies it? Well, you have some reasons for thinking that, your perceptual system is giving you good information. Does that justification guarantee that P is true, that what you're looking at is a hand? No, of course not, right? Justification for the internalist is a feature of internal states. It's a property of your beliefs or thoughts, and you can be wrong about those, right? So your belief that your perceptual state is accurately representing the world, which justifies your belief that, this is a hand when you're looking at it, that could be wrong. Just because your belief that P is justified by your other belief that Q doesn't mean that you know P because Q could be false, right? If Q could be false, then how do you know that you know is part of the problem here. How can you really be justified in the end? Don't you just fall victim to some form of skepticism because, you can never really get outside yourself and know for sure that, your perceptual apparatus is actually representing the world in a correct way. You could always be in a matrix-like scenario. And so it seems like skepticism rears its head on the internalist picture, at least initially, because it's, if justification is just this internal relationship that holds between beliefs that you have, when you recognize that one supports another, it seems like justification is missing something. It's missing a connection to the truth. Whether or not a reason or belief, one belief supports another belief, it seems like there needs to be some connection to the truth for it to really be justification. So the externalist kind of poses some problems for internalism. Internalism is problematic because justification is not sufficiently connected to the truth. That is, you can be justified and still fail to know, because you can have good reasons for believing things that turn out to accidentally be false or actually be false. The externalist thinks that justification should be more closely connected or tightly connected to the truth, and whether or not one's beliefs are justified should be determined more by how likely they are to be true, not by whether or not you have some good reason for thinking they're true. Right? Whether or not, like, the likelihood itself, the possibility of there being truth, should be the thing that's more important than the fact that you can self-reflectively come to recognize that you think that they're true. So on the externalist view, there should be a more objective connection between the beliefs that you have and whether or not those beliefs are true, regardless of your internal mental states of being able to sort of come to recognize that there's some sort of connection. According to internalism, you need to be able to sort of think about, access the justification that you have for your own beliefs in order for those beliefs to be justified at all, right? You have to be able to recognize your reasons for holding certain beliefs in order for those beliefs to count as being justified. Otherwise, you would lack knowledge. You just simply wouldn't know what it is that you thought that you knew. But this raises something like some sort of problem, right? Like, what about people or creatures that don't have complicated internal mental lives and don't have the ability to recognize their own reasons for their beliefs, right? Like, what about your grandma that has dementia? What about baby Timmy when he's looking up at his parents from the crib? It seems clear as day that he can recognize his mother, but he doesn't have the ability to think about his reasoning. What about Pupper Joey, right? When I drive home and park in the driveway, he immediately knows that I'm home by hearing, the car, but he doesn't have the complicated internal mental states that are involved in coming to recognize that his reasons for thinking that I'm home. And so don't these individuals seem to have knowledge sometimes, right? Even if they don't always have knowledge, because, dogs are dogs, they're not always so smart. Babies clearly can't always know, or can't know a lot of things, can't know complicated things. And, grandparents with dementia, they lose track of knowledge all the time. But it seems like even if they don't have these critical thinking abilities and internal states, that they still have knowledge sometimes. For instance, your grandma still knows your name, even though she's fading into dementia. Again, baby Timmy knows who his parents are, even though he can't speak or think about them yet in any complicated way. And Joey knows when I pull into the driveway. It seems like these knowers don't really have the complicated internal mental lives that the internalist thinks that they need in order to know what they believe, right? That the justification that they have isn't they don't have access to it, but it seems like it still justifies them in believing what they believe. And so there must be something else, something external is what the externalist thinks, or something about the larger contexts that these people are placed in, these individuals are placed in, that allows them to know, or allows us to say that they know. That's the externalist idea. Now, there are a number of different externalist views, different attempts at explaining what it is for someone to be justified without saying that their justification has to be some sort of internal, evidential reasons for believing something. And different theories have, popped up over time. One theory, not necessarily the best one, but probably the first one that people tried, was what we would call the causal theory of knowledge. The causal theory of knowledge basically says that for some proposition P and some knower S, that if S knows that P, then S's belief that P must have been caused by the fact that P. So, the idea here is that there's a proposition P, and that proposition represents a fact out in the world. Let's say that snow is white. And if some knower S knows that snow is white, then S's belief that snow is white must have been caused in some way by the fact that snow is white. So the fact out there somehow, impinges on somebody's retinal patterns, and those retinal patterns create in that person a belief that snow is white, and then that person goes on and tells S that snow is white, right? And now the idea is, at some point, the fact that snow is white caused this long causal chain that ultimately results in S's belief that snow is white. Now, this is a cool idea, and it ensures that there's some sort of truth connection, right? It ensures, the idea being that it ensures that a person's belief that P is connected to the truth, because there has to be this long causal chain that reaches back from the belief all the way to the fact. And ultimately, it makes being justified when you believe things connected to the actual facts. The problem, though, is that, there's lots of big problems for this view. There are counterexamples to the causal theory of knowledge, in particular, like the case of causal deviance, right? So imagine you believe Z, and the belief that Z is that you just took a drug that made you forget everything that you ever knew, right? That's what you believe, right? You have this belief that you just took a drug that made you forget everything you ever knew. And you did, right? You're actually, this belief is true. You did just take a drug that made you forget everything you ever knew. It just so happens that this drug, when you take it, it makes you forget everything, and then it fills your head with totally new random beliefs. And it just so happens that this drug put belief Z in your head. Now, here, in this situation, this is a complicated and crazy situation, but taking the drug caused you to believe Z, right? The fact that you had just taken a drug that made you forget everything that you ever knew caused you to come to believe that you'd just taken a drug that made you forget everything you ever knew. Now, according to the causal theory of knowledge, that would be enough for you to know that you just took a drug that made you forget everything you ever knew, except this can't be, right? It doesn't seem right to say that anyone that just took a drug that made them believe everything they ever knew, and just so happened that drug caused them to believe the same thing, this person shouldn't be counted as a knower in this scenario, because it seems like this isn't the right kind of causal story. This isn't the knowledge here didn't come about in the right way. The knowledge ultimately is just lucky belief, because on the basis of this drug causing this belief in this individual. So causal deviance is a problem, because basically all that needs to happen is if a belief is caused by a fact but in the wrong kind of way, then it seems like we shouldn't say that the person knows. Another problem is, for the causal theory of knowledge, is knowing generalizations. That is, knowing statements of the form all F's are G's. Anytime you've got an all blank are blank statement, it seems like this is going to be a problem for the causal theory of knowledge. So now, take these really basic statements that all men are mortal, or that all cats are mammals. Now, ultimately, these statements reflect facts out there in the world, right? But these facts aren't the kinds of things that can cause beliefs. They're not like physical entities that are out there that you can run into that can have causal impact on our lives, right? You can't really be in contact with the fact that all men are mortal, right? Sure, of course you can go and check and see if a man is mortal, right? You can stab him in the heart and he dies. Oh, okay, he was mortal. No, you can also go and see if cats are mammals, like see if individual cats are mammals. But each of those situations only gets you a particular, not like a particular bit of knowledge, particular knowledge of that individual, not of the entire group. So these generalizations that we seem to be able to know, um, they don't come around piecemeal, right? It's not that we're not assuming it's not a different kind of claim where I'm assuming well all men that I've interacted with thus far have been mortal. No, it's the claim that all men are mortal. Well, how could I possibly know that if the fact that all men are mortal isn't some causal thing that has caused in me this belief? So that seems like a big problem for the causal theory of knowledge because there are lots of generalizations that we seem to know, but we can't know them on this theory. So if the causal theory has these problems, it seems like we should throw it out or change it substantially in some way to bring about ways to solve for these problems. And one externalist view that has fared better than the causal theory of knowledge is a view called reliabilism. Now, generally, when we lack knowledge, when something kind of goes wrong, when we're trying to believe something, when we're trying to know, the reason that things go wrong is because there's some kind of error in the process by which we came to have the belief that we had, right? So like we fall victim to illusions when we, take any optical illusion, you look at it and you think, oh wow, it looks like, the colors are moving. And it's not, it's just an optical illusion, but why do you fall victim to it? Sometimes we reason poorly, we jump to conclusions or we follow certain kinds of fallacies, or sometimes we just trust the wrong person. Now, why in each of these cases did we fail to know something? What exactly is it that each of these cases have in common? Well, at least in part, in each of these cases, the thing that's at fault is that some aspect of your, the story that comes to cause the belief that you have in you is unreliable, right? So in cases like perceptual illusions, your perceptual system is failing you in some way, right? Sometimes when you jump to conclusions, you have certain cognitive biases that are unreliable, that are failing you in particular ways, and that's why you're reasoning poorly. And then other times, there's just people that are out there that are unreliable because they're unreliable with the facts. They're liars. So now, if the reasoning behind the failures to know are all unreliable situations or unreliable individuals, maybe the idea the reliabilist takes is that what it takes to know is that our beliefs are ultimately the products of some kind of reliable process, some kind of reliable belief forming process. So the idea for reliabilism is that to be justified in having some belief is just to have your belief be the result of a reliable process. So basically, just think about your perceptual system. Your perceptual system is a pretty reliable process. It gets things right most of the time. Sometimes you're fooled by, by perceptual illusions. Maybe it's possible that you're fooled completely, in a matrix-like scenario with skepticism. But for the most part, given what this perceptual system was kind of designed to do, it's pretty damn reliable, right? Most of the time, what you see is what you get. And the idea there is that, well, that's why the perceptual system gives you justification for the beliefs that you have, right? It's a reliable process. It's reliable at forming the beliefs that you come to have. So when you look at your hand, you're basically relying on the reliability of your perceptual system to give you a correct belief. And poof, you've got a justified belief on this view that you're looking at a hand. Similarly, like, listening to the right people, like your teachers or something like that, right? They're not liars. They're reliable individuals. So listening to people that are reliable is a reliable process, and it makes it, it seems to give you justification for the beliefs that you have on the basis of listening to those people. Also, using good logic and correct reasoning, avoiding certain cognitive biases and logical or reasoning pitfalls. If you rely on the correct forms of reasoning, they are reliable processes that get you to good beliefs. And so it looks like maybe if these reliable processes really, link you up with true beliefs, then you'd be justified. Now, reliabilism itself has its own problems, and skepticism again rears its head for even this form of externalist view, where externalism in general is supposed to, at least in a way, escape skepticism because of the sort of reliable connection to the truth that's supposed to be the idea. But imagine, we have this variation on the brain in the vat scenario, where there's a brain in a vat that's hooked up to a computer, but then there's also this guy, Bob, who's hooked up to the same computer, and he's normal. And whenever Bob goes out into the world, there's sort of a transistor in his head that reports back to the computer what exactly he's doing, what he's seeing, what he's smelling. And the computer then triggers the same mental happenings that Bob is having in the brain in the vat. Now here, Bob's beliefs are justified, and they're being caused by a reliable process, right? Bob is seeing these things out in the world and coming to believe on the basis of these reliable processes, whereas the brain in the vat's beliefs are ultimately unjustified, and they're caused by an unreliable process, right? They're being caused by Bob going out there in the world, and then the computer itself, right? These beliefs are not things that the brain in the vat are actually seeing. But wait a minute, in this case, the brain in the vat and Bob ultimately have the exact same reasons for their beliefs, right? Because they're seeing exactly the same things. So it's funny if we think that the brain in the vat's beliefs are if we think that they aren't justified, because it seems like they're the same reasons that Bob has. So what gives here? Like, either it seems like both of them are justified or both of them are unjustified because they have exactly the same reasons. And it seems like this is how skepticism is supposed to get going in the first place, right? If you're in the matrix, you seem to be justified in your beliefs. You're just very unlucky, right? Because, there's a computer program that's controlling what you're actually seeing. But it still seems like, you have the best possible beliefs, the best possible justification for the beliefs that you have. You're just very unlucky that, you're in a world in which there's a computer, aliens or a mad scientist or robots, AI, artificial intelligence is like taking over the world and is just feeding you this information. Further problems for reliabilism as a view of justification is, well, so there's the case of accidental reliability. Imagine someone, knocks you out, or like while you're asleep, they implant a temperature tracker into your brain. And this temperature tracker gives you an accurate belief about the temperature in New York City at any given moment, right? The temperature tracker, is just sort of, it tells you, like, oh, it's 72 and 80% humidity in New York City right now. You don't know that this temperature tracker is accurate, or that it's even been implanted into your brain, but you just find yourself having these, these beliefs, these accurate beliefs that are being caused up, about the weather in New York. Now, here, this seems wild. It's a crazy situation, but there's this reliable belief forming process that's going on, right? You're coming to have reliably true beliefs about New York City, right? But it doesn't seem like you'd be justified in believing them, right? Because you have no idea about this implanted temperature tracker that's been put into your brain. So without knowing something about why it is that you're getting these accurate beliefs about the temperature and weather in New York City. It seems like you just aren't justified in these beliefs, even though they're reliable and accurate. That seems like a problem. A further problem, a sort of even larger problem for reliabilism in general, is the question of what exactly counts as reliability, because there's certain kinds of levels of generality about reliability that aren't clear here. So when you are in the United States and you see a big red, building on a farm, you can be pretty reliably, seen to take, to believe that that's a barn, right? But suppose you're in Fake Barn County. If you're in Fake Barn County, where there are mostly barn facades along the side of the road, it's like 95% barn facades. Well, if you're in Fake Barn County, are you reliable with respect to picking out real barns over fake barns? Well, so you come across what looks like a barn to you. Do you know that it's a barn? Well, if you're in Fake Barn County, it seems like you're unreliable. But wait a minute, what about the fact that, like, suppose the fact that Fake Barn County is this tiny little county in this larger area where, 95% of all the barns in the state are real, and then there's like 5% of these facades, right? These structures that are fake barns. Well, so now it looks like you are reliable, right? Because in the state, 95% of the time you're going to get it right, whereas only in this tiny little county are you going to get it wrong. Well, so what should we think, right? You're in Fake Barn County. You're unreliable with respect to this small area that you're in. You're totally reliable with respect to the larger area that you're in. So what exactly should we count as reliability? How general should we go? How big should we go? How small should we go? How narrow should we go when it comes to thinking about what exactly is involved here? The sort of final takeaway here, I think, for thinking about epistemology and justification, and what we can conclude from this debate over externalism and internalism, something like this. Ultimately, the debate about the nature of justification is a debate about whether or not justification has something to do with the quality for our reasons of belief, or a kind of epistemic value, like, whether or not we have good reasons for the things that we believe, or something more objective and valueless, a sort of feature of the world that has some relationship, objective relationship to the truth. So whether or not you're justified, whether or not you have come to know something in a good way, it's just a question of whether or not you need to be in the right sort of internal state where you've taken the right sort of stance towards the truth, and you have the right sort of reasons for thinking that you believe the truth, or you have to sort of be standing in the right kind of situation externally with respect to the truth. And it's got nothing to do really with what's going on inside of your head. And it could be both. It could be that ultimately a complicated theory of justification is going to take both of these things into account. But it's entirely unclear at this point which one matters more, or which one takes precedent.